Yeah. And so as we begin to recognize, the choice point inside of ourselves, one part of that is recognizing how much becomes familiar, how much becomes just a default in what always has been. And then the alternative is being awake to ourselves, asking ourselves bigger questions about who am I really? If I'm not just this machine in the default world, and I am this organic, alive, connected to life presence, what does that mean? And what does that mean not just for myself, but in my everyday world of making thousands of choices?
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, I hope you'll join me in welcoming the remarkable wisdom and presence of an advanced practitioner in her own right, Naomi Irons. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I'm Dean Walker, your host on this YouTube channel, The Poetry of Predicament. And I am just really pleased that this is, I think, maybe my third, maybe my fourth time of being able to speak directly with Naomi Irons here on the show. And Naomi, as you may have seen here on Poetry of Predicament or on the sister podcast, Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams, Naomi has just been doing some knockout interviews with folks that she is deeply inspired by. And true to form, every one of those interviews has just been full of insight and relationship and like a resonance that just escalates. And so I'm throwing in some acknowledgement of you, Naomi, before I let you speak and invite you to come on. And today I'm particularly excited because this is a perfect example of the type of statement that I'd like to keep bringing forth in this podcast. And that is basically, in these extraordinary times of predicament, what are our choices? What are our choices in being and in relationship and in presence? What are our choices if all we've ever known growing up is the business as usual way of being and relating and doing things? And that's the very paradigm that has taken us to this brink. And so who Naomi is for me is one of a handful of exemplars from a particular body of work. And those of you who watch this podcast from time to time, you know I don't just talk with people from the WEL Systems body of work that Naomi is well versed in. There are others. But the point is, that's what these podcasts need to be really from now on is, if not the business as usual culture and way of being and way of doing things and way of presencing, then what? And I just want to keep talking with people who have something to say to answer that question. Like, what's it like being in that model, in that framing of being alive and encountering the ups and downs of daily life? it's no less challenging for these folks who are advanced practitioners. So for me, I learn every time I get to speak with Naomi and anyone of her ilk. So, Naomi, I'm really excited that we're talking today. And let me just stop there and get you on the screen and have you say hi in whatever way is good for you to say hi.
Thank you so much for having me, Dean, and for the introduction. I think that so often, like, this really is the way I live my life. So, in our brief chat before we came on, it is this experience of asking the fish, "How's the water?" That really, for the last 12 years of my life, really choosing just a very different default. I think that would be a great way of describing it. The business as usual world was my foundation for many, many, many years. And it was, a place that I came to know very, very intimately and deeply in not knowing, and not really having any idea of what it was to be so connected and internally referenced to my own guidance system. And now it is, I'm delighted to say it's the opposite. It really is the business as usual world makes less and less sense to me. It's less of what I feel connected to on a daily basis. And I've really, in my own life, taken that to be my own personal journey. And then I keep widening that circle for myself to include, my own family and my community and these podcasts and any way that feels really organic for me to engage with others. So that's a bit of an introduction to take us from, what does default even mean in a business as usual world as compared to a world that we create from inside of ourselves, and we really exhale it, and we create that as reality for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm pleased to have a little bit more of a picture of how you're doing and how you got to where you are and what you include when you talk about the world you're in. I'm curious. I'd like to share with you just a little bit. I just did an interview recently with a certainly nationally renowned and actually internationally renowned mental health policy analyst and contributor. She's a psychiatrist in the Washington, D.C. area. Her name is Lisa Van Susteren. And I got to meet her at a conference for a new organization about 3 years ago called the Transformational Resilience Innovation Group. So that's a whole big story. And the bottom line of it is I was looking for what's the best toolkit out there for people who are stressing out about what's going on. Yes, that has something substantially to do with climate change, but those who have read my book will know it's a lot more than that. It's like our world right now. Obviously, we've got COVID stuff going on. We've got any number of other existential level challenges going on. And that transformational resilience is quite an extraordinary skill set and body of work from a guy named Bob Doppelt. And I'll put the link to that in the show notes. And Lisa Van Susteren was one of the main speakers at that conference. And she put out a report just a year or so before that conference. And the report was basically analyzing and assessing, estimating how many people in the USA would be suffering from or experiencing some acute or chronic mental health stress in the face of these many challenges that we have going on. And the primary one that they mentioned there is climate stuff. And their estimate was approximately 200 million. 200 million out of a country with approximately 350 million people in it. So I did an interview with her around that conference, and I've done 2 other interviews subsequent to that, and then a third one just a couple weeks ago. And in every one of those subsequent interviews, she has said, my regret is we grossly underestimated that number. So there's something pretty screwed up with the business as usual model. If that's the number that we're looking at, that was anticipated 4 or 5 years ago in that report, and it's now clearly more than that. So I guess what I'm getting at is that we have an essentially very fragile mental health predicament in this country on top of all those stressors, which means people aren't trained very well how to be healthy, how to have a wholeness, how to have a stability, how to have a way of referencing inside their experience to determine what's true for me in this moment, and out of what part of me can I generate a truth that fuels me into this moment, that takes me to work, that chooses what kind of work I'm going to do, fuels me in relationship, that kind of thing. So I'm sorry for that's kind of dry and some clinical stuff and some statistics and so on. And I don't mean us to go there, but I know because we checked in before we got going here. I'm concerned. I have some big concerns about where we are, particularly as the USA. I think we are indeed in the worst shape of just about any country on the planet at this point. So this conversation is pretty important. And why it's important is I would like those, and particularly women, it's still particularly women, mostly women, that are to take part in this work, not exclusively, but mostly. But I would like anyone who's listening to just kind of get a sense of there are alternatives to that business as usual way of thinking, way of processing, where one is looking in order to find one's truth in the moment, psychological stability. Is there any part of what I'm saying that is a thread you'd like to pull on?
Absolutely. I think the image that came up for me as I was listening to you, and it's one of the iceberg. And if we think of an iceberg and we think about what is above the waterline, and we call that the business as usual world.
Yeah.
So what we've been taught is real and true. What we've been taught is, our greatest challenges and our biggest fears. Above that waterline is what we're calling external referencing. So it's what we've been taught and trained to see outside of ourselves. And oftentimes what I'm noticing in the larger world and in those that are seeking to engage something different is that often that leaves us in a place of powerlessness. So we feel really almost uninspired to engage because it's this sense of something that we have no control over, that we have no power over. And so really what has become so apparent, not just in my own life, but in the lives of many others, is when we dip below that waterline and what we call internal sensing. And what begins to happen is that we lose interest in finding the answers, and we really begin a whole exploration of asking bigger questions, and really asking those bigger questions of ourselves in a way that we begin to connect to a sense of our own power, our own recognition that every breath we take, we're making a choice. It's not that I make a choice and then, I let this long period of time lag, which I think that's been the business as usual world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make a choice that feels right, and then I'm going to go about my daily life and the distractions and all of the things that are happening. And then all of a sudden I'm presented with another pressing choice. But we forget to look at all of the choices that we've made in between those two. Does that make sense?
Sure. And so you're suggesting that there is at least another way to access that choice point inside ourselves rather than based on some sort of external figuring it out.
Yeah. And so as we begin to recognize, the choice point inside of ourselves, one part of that is recognizing how much becomes familiar, how much becomes just a default in what always has been. And then the alternative is being awake to ourselves, asking ourselves bigger questions about who am I really? If I'm not just this machine in the default world, and I am this organic, alive, connected to life presence, what does that mean? And what does that mean not just for myself, but in my everyday world of making thousands of choices, you know? And so that is underneath that waterline where we begin to recognize, oh, this is a process of self. This is where I become empowered to first know myself, come to understand, part of the WEL Systems journey is coming to understand there are very predictable stepping stones to seeing how we have become shaped to be who we believe ourselves to be. But then beyond that, and I think we've talked about this before, it's where we go beyond just the regular sitting in circle and, examining our beliefs. We go beyond that to recognizing that what we are is something entirely different than what we've been taught.
Mm-hmm.
That we are these organic quantum processors of information and of choice and of, the recognition that all of it is playing out at the same time. And when we begin to break that down simply, we come to see that we are so much more than we have been taught to believe we are.
Yeah. I'm going to try my best to reflect some of that back using slightly different pictures, and you can just tell me if I'm in the ballpark. So what I notice, the average person's attention these days is, well, it's the coin of the realm. It is the most valuable commodity on the planet, is each of our attention. Where's our attention every moment of every day? And more and more and more of it is in screens and devices outside of us. And then the kind of quasi relationships that are our connections with people through those devices and through the social media and so on. And then the kind of tribal meme based world beyond that, and each of those can be an extraordinary influence on the average person. That is, after all, what they're spending the most time in their day with. It isn't their children, it isn't their lover, it isn't their parents, it's the screen. And so every bit of that is outside, is external, is an external reference for how do I choose to be right now? How do I choose to react right now? What kind of emotions are approved of in my tribe right now, and so on. Is that in the ballpark of kind of the business as usual side?
Absolutely. And really recognizing, like, even in this experience right now with you, all I can do with my external sensing is know where you are and what you're doing. Everything beyond that is a story that I craft inside of myself. And so often this is becoming reality. What we are thinking is happening and going on, and our relationships with others, and the intimacy that we crave. The moment that we start to get curious within ourselves and we start to pay attention, I think you're spot on. You know, energy flows where attention goes. So I think that if we break it down in the simplest form, just noticing where is our attention.
Yeah.
Where is our attention in different places, we're going to notice it's different.
Yeah. I'm going to make a big jump here because I'm just concerned. We could easily talk for 3, 4, 5 hours, but I know folks don't have the attention span for that. And I think we both have other things we need to get onto. I want to jump to kind of an odd other place that I hope I'll be able to connect the two well for us. A couple of years ago, I had a very good friend of mine. He's a local Indigenous elder, and a very powerful man. And he's speaking at a conference. And at the end of the conference, he said, while times are somewhat normal, remember this is a year and a half before COVID. And he was saying, while things are still somewhat normal, this is the time to do your inner work. Do your inner work because it's going to be needed. And he went on to say, but you get the idea. And so I've been in this gathering mode my whole life. I don't know why, but it's just been something that I've been there to do in terms of gathering for my own practices. And then more recently, in the past 20 years or so, is to gather to put together what I call an inner toolkit that people can choose from as they engage with the work that I do. The practices that they can use to reconnect with deeper self, with other people, with the earth, and with soul. One of the things that really drew me to WEL Systems work, beyond just the initial conversations and enjoying, pleasant conversations and hearing these remarkable stories and feeling the presence with you all, is especially when I was given this opportunity to kind of get my toe in the water with your work, to listen to a big bunch of audio, recordings, and also have a kind of a custom session with Deb Gleason, another practitioner with y'all. I noticed that it's the work has these pivot moments that when what you're talking about, I think, is this orienting my attention into my core experience within my body, that this body has this extraordinary ability to discern moment by moment with the, makes supercomputing look slow and small, compared especially to our usual thinking, which is slower still. And so there's this immediacy in this internally referent model that really has been breathtaking for me to get a sense of. because a number of the other bodies of work that I've included, and I still hold them, and they're still hold water, and they're good, and I want them to be in the toolbox. But when I look at emotional release work or trauma release work, or any number of these other modalities, they take time, and they take a lot of processing, and a lot of going back through, life events and so on. And that's, again, for some people, that is much needed and really right on. Can you speak to why the focal point in the body?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the models that we use is called quantum TLC. And, TLC can be this tender loving care. But what it stands for, the main purpose of TLC is triggering new life choices. So in the default model, the business as usual world, where we're really making choices that keep reflecting the same thing, even if we want something different, and we have a different thought about something. What quantum TLC allows us to do is it allows us to take our attention that we normally have up behind our eyes. That is, usually thinking some of the same 65,000 thoughts that we have in the run of a day. And what quantum TLC does is it invites us to take our attention and place it in our body. And instead of the old model of emotion, really beginning to change the language to energy and information. So even as you're sitting right now, present in your body, noticing what you are sensing, that those are sensations, and that those sensations carry information. And in the work of Candace Pert, she wrote a beautiful book called Molecules of Emotion. And what she began to realize is that when energy and information is in flow in the body and moving, it cascades as a white curtain of light that every single cell is communicating with every other cell. And that this is just a natural, normal process that the body engages. But when we take our attention outside the body and we begin to live in a mode that locks everything down, we don't have access to that information. And so when we bring our attention and our awareness and our experience, so what we're experiencing in the world around us, together in the same place at the same time, that's what we call a quantum TLC moment. So if I am, let's say I'm engaging with my kids and I'm having a conversation with them, and something happens that triggers me, and I feel this great amount of what I might call anger or grief, whatever it is that's presenting in my body, I stop and I take just a moment to take that label off, so that all of a sudden I am now with sensation moving in my body. And I am present to that, and I give myself that experience rather than reacting, to my child or reacting to the external circumstances. I give myself that moment, and I recognize that the power is in my body. The power is not in replaying the scene, in reacting to it, that my body is actually a much more powerful processor than if I just react, or if I go up into my head and I try and figure something out. And so, over the course of many years now, that's become something that I trust almost immediately. But I want to back up just a tiny little bit, because what's required of being able to give myself permission for that experience is I have to know I'm safe. I have to know that I'm safe inside my own body. And oftentimes when triggers happen, they come from a place of having been not safe, many years ago or in an experience. And so a lot of times that takes our attention outside of us. And so what we're doing in this body of work in the WEL Systems, this is just a little tiny piece of it, but it's a really important piece, because what it allows is it allows me to relax into myself. And what I see in that when I look around the world right now is, as everything becomes more polarized and everybody has a reaction to something or an opinion about something, there's very, very little power to create change in that. And so what I am in full recognition of, and I have no problem sharing this, is that change happens when we engage a different process. If we keep engaging the same process, the same, well, here's new information that I'm gleaning, now I have a new opinion and I have a new reaction to, the business as usual. So for me, it's always about bringing myself to that choice point where it's not about engaging the collapse. It's about, how do I engage the expansion? And our bodies know, Dean, like our bodies are these brilliant, they process so much more. It's kind of like, I love the analogy of, the old VHS tapes. So you'd put the VHS tape in and you'd press play and you'd watch this movie and you'd be captivated by the sights and the sounds and the experience of it. And quantum TLC is really about putting that VHS tape into the machine and pressing fast forward. So instead of being lured into the content and the, everything that is, we're used to being grabbed by, something outside of us. It really is allowing that whole process to happen in a matter of 30 seconds. And we're different. And all of a sudden now, our incredible minds can be used for something as simple as yes, no, go right, go left. Like that is the simplicity of who we really are, rather than the drama and the story and, all that content rich process that slows everything down. I hope I've made that not more complicated, but it's a complex process that when you actually engage it for yourself is so simple.
No, I don't think that was too complex at all. I was and am very inspired by it, because I've had a sense of what you're talking about. I've got my first few moments of that kind of processing under my belt, and so I'm really loving it. And I particularly appreciate the last thing you said, that there's a disengagement of it. It's like it becomes unnecessary. There's not even any drama in the let go. It just becomes unnecessary to have the drama connected to it. Certainly it can be. I've seen in myself and heard through others their ability to, grapple with some things from their past that were pretty substantial. But there's this way in which that no matter where we are in the process, it seems like there's this built-in ability to let go of that drama that we all seem to have wrapped up around virtually every part of our history. And that is a part of what I was trying to describe before. There's just this amazement at how it can go like that. It can be like that. It might take me a little bit more because I still have a little attachment to some drama or some story, but the process seems to just by its nature, the more y'all are involved with it, the less importance that drama has. And so the quicker the access to a new choice point that's informed by what's present here now. And I don't know how to say something. I don't know how to encapsulate process work any simpler than that. That's pretty freaking simple. Wow.
Well, and then we end up empowered rather than seeking another guru or another external force or an external reference point that, really it's as simple as, in this exchange with you, my truth about you leaves me powerless. My truth about myself in relationship to you carries all the power. And when two people, what I'm beginning to recognize is when two people allow that experience, which is what we invite in all of the WEL Systems body of work, is a conversation. It's as simple as and as complex as allowing ourselves to be unscripted.
Yeah.
To really allowing ourselves to not say from 10:10 to 10:25, this is the agenda.
Right.
Because how does this immense force of life be funneled into an agenda? And that's really hard because in the business as usual world, it's all about agenda. It's all about how do we soundbite something? How do we make something, package it? And what I'm talking about is really the opposite of how do we unfurl this? How do we allow this space that if I want to stop and I want to take a breath and we want to change gears and we want to shift the direction, even if we had an agenda coming into this, that can be what we allow. And that can be between two people. You can just feel the power and the permission to be ourselves. And in this world, that is pretty low on the agenda, in getting shit accomplished.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I would just like to pause for a moment. I've become quite renowned for my pauses. And to me, that's what allows me to kind of shift gears to a bit closer to that center point that's just my way of describing the point that I think you keep talking about. It's very difficult for me to look out into this world. Right now we're recording this about the third week in August in 2020. And it's a time like no other I've ever seen. It's the most challenging time in human history on a number of different levels as far as I'm concerned. And so what we're talking about, if we were talking about this 5 years ago and we were sharing about, well, I do this kind of personal development work. What kind of personal development work do you do? What kind of weekend workshops do you lead? And I've had a 1,000 conversations about that. And what I know about that back then was it was only a small, tiny little fragment of the world's population who were privileged enough and who then were interested enough to kind of get off their rear ends and explore new realities, new possibilities. And what I'm seeing now is kind of like what my good friend Aaron that I was describing before, what he was warning us or admonishing us to do, which is to do that inner work. It no longer looks so discretionary. I think that anyone who's not doing whatever, I don't care if it's WEL Systems, I don't care if it's one of the 6 other methodologies that I've got in the toolkit, it doesn't matter. Whatever a person chooses as inner work to be able to become more and more present in the face of larger and larger stressors in life, to be more and more of a loving presence consistently, rather than being buffeted and smashed by the external circumstances so that they can't show up for their children. They can't show up for their loving relationships. It's an extraordinary time you and I are talking about right now. So it's a different conversation than it was 5, 10, or 20 years ago. These are advanced skills that truthfully, if I could just speak a little bit roughly, which I'm also renowned for, I think a whole lot of Americans in particular, both, it doesn't matter if they're people who are collapse aware, full-blown doomers, or near-term human extinction crowd, doesn't matter if they're politics. There's a whole lot of America that really thinks, no, I got this. No, we got this. Hey, if we're good, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm just a little bored during this pause for the COVID thing, but I'm fine. I'm good. I don't need to hear what Naomi's talking about or what Dean's talking about. We don't need this shit. And my assessment is that the vast majority of human beings on this planet don't have a fucking clue. Don't have any idea what the internal resources they need to be carrying look like, feel like. They have no idea. They just literally don't know what they don't know. And this isn't me being the arrogant guru guy. And if you just come study with me, everything's fine. No, I don't care what people choose to do. But if you think that what you've learned in your lifetime as the skill set for self-regulation and co-regulation and resilience skills in your life, not to mention getting to a discernment of choice point that is truly an act of power, like you've been describing. If people think that those business as usual level skills are going to do just fine in the coming years, I think they're going to get mowed. I think it's going to be just an incredibly tragic mowing down of people who are completely ill-prepared to be present in the face of even larger stressors than we've got going on now. And they promise to get larger. So I'm sorry to be kind of a downer for a moment, but I really just wanted to put some gravitas into it, because this isn't 5 years ago when it was just a choice. Shall I do this weekend workshop and feel better about myself or not? No, this is there's really some skin in the game, whether we believe it or not, or we agree with this point of view or not. This is the time to find our people. This is a time to build out skills and capacity. And I think what you're describing is some extraordinary addition to that body of work, that collective body of work of all the different bodies of work that offer this kind of stuff. And I'm just curious, again, I don't mean to take us into some dark hole here, but I'm curious if that gravitas moment sparks you to share anything.
You know, what I thought of, Dean, as I was listening to you was a number of years ago. So the question inside of me right now as I'm listening is, what I hear you asking is like, what does it take? What does it take for a collective to wake up? What does it take for, us to not just look for the little I know what it is, to look for the relief, you know, to look for that, I can tolerate and I can manage and I can withstand my own life for another week, another month, another year, until I'm finding myself back in a different conversation. What is that awakening that we have to come to inside of ourselves? And what it reminded me of is many, many years ago, waking up. And I have, for a long time, I think as long as I've been on this planet, have had this restlessness and this knowing and this sense beyond the business as usual world. And it was almost like, for a long time, I just learned how to run the marathon and go in the direction of the vast majority of people, but knowing something different. And I think this is the key. And waking up one day and going, this isn't the right direction. This isn't it. And really having the courage and the tenacity, I guess, to turn in the face of thousands of people going in one direction and start to carve out my own path. And I think that is the sense I have of what so many others are looking for. It's not that they're looking to go with the crowd or against the crowd, because I think that's the business as usual world. It's for those that are looking to carve out their own path and a life that they can wake up every day, no matter what is happening in the world around us, and be propelled to open their eyes, to have a new thought, to have a internal sense of worth and purpose. And I don't mean purpose in an old paradigm way, that I take a breath in and I exhale that is my worth. And then from there, I can choose and I can create a life that doesn't have me constantly backtracking or constantly giving up to what I'm being shown and shaped in the world around me. Does that?
Yeah, thank you. It does. And while you were speaking, you reminded me of an earlier conversation you and I had. We both know Louise LeBrun, the woman who founded the work, the WEL Systems body of work. And you were kind enough to share a quote that you then got her permission to share with me. And I'm wondering, would that be all right for us to share that quote here?
Absolutely. I think it's perfect.
Again, Louise LeBrun, the founder of this WEL Systems work that Naomi's describing for us. And I began to notice that for vast majority of those with whom I might engage, their interests were fleeting, often confined to the painful moment and its propelling quest for the pain to stop. And once it did, everything else stopped too. Their pursuit was shaped by the immediacy of the provocation and not by any higher order call for discovery of the magic. Never mind the magic, just make the pain stop. They never seemed to notice that the great prize was not that the pain stopped. It was that there was a process that could be mindfully engaged that would cause any pain to stop. And even after the pain stopped, there was little wonder or curiosity about how did that happen? That it stopped was their magic, and the mundane prevailed. at least until the next round of pain. And on it went. That's scathingly, and in my experience, boldly true for the vast majority of us, and certainly for me in much of my life in the past. I feel very blessed to have a sense of what she's talking about in terms of the magic, in terms of what is available and really within easy reach at that moment, if I were willing to set aside my fixation on the pain and its relief. Really bold and really extraordinary, and really far more concise and eloquently put than I have been trying to point at what seems to be the world's condition right now, especially in privileged places like the USA, where we have actually even more tragic default thinking and presencing than that, in which we're literally killing each other. We're literally making choices through either inattention to existential level concerns, or more obviously in the COVID responses, we're killing each other. So I promise that's the end of my gravitas part. Won't be going there anymore. Plenty. I so thank you for getting with Louise and getting her permission to read that quote. And I'm just curious if there's anything you'd like to say, particularly about that magic.
Well, I think that, as we're talking, and I can feel it, not becoming narrower in a sense of less than, but just this focus for me, in the parenting podcast, in pretty much any conversation that I feel compelled to engage these days, is really with the recognition that this is about evolution and growth on an ongoing basis. So it's like, for its own sake, I think is such a powerful, I'm going to call it new way of being, because it's the only way that I know how to describe it, rather than what you were talking about, that weekend empowerment, and then going back into our lives and trying to keep that alive for as long as we can. The moment that we begin, and I think this is the power of what Louise is talking about in the process, once we know that there is a simple, generic, universal process that we can engage, that we are then the magic that creates our lives, that becomes so much more compelling. Does it mean that it's easy and effortless? Of course not. We're bumping up against places and spaces inside of ourselves and in relationships with others and in, our everyday life, that take us to our own edge, really take us to our own edge. But I've come to the place, with such certainty in my own life, that I would rather be at the edge of my own growth and my own evolution and my own self-sustaining life than to be pushed to the edge of a business as usual world, feeling powerless and feeling resourceless, essentially.
Yeah. And
so what you and I are talking about today is the entry point. The entry point being internal. The entry point being the magic. The magic is always who we have been. From that spark of light of our choice to enter this realm, we have never lost the magic of who we are. Have we forgotten? Have we distracted ourselves? Have we become more enthralled and enticed with content and drama? And absolutely, as a whole, I'm speaking. But the moment we're ready for that entry point, and this is the piece that I have long, I feel like let go of, is I can't want more for somebody than they want for themselves. Mm-hmm. But the moment they're willing to turn and face themselves, we have a whole other world that is accessible to us. Mm-hmm. And resources and tools and, inner guidance and acceleration that we just haven't been taught is accessible. And until we wring out, until we do our inner work and we wring out that history that keeps us bound and keeps us trapped and keeps us believing we're small and insignificant, that becomes just this like over and over again repetition that we call life. Mm-hmm. And when we're willing to end that as a lineage and we're willing to turn and face ourselves, everything becomes possible. The magic is, I love the quote that magic is always just there waiting for our senses to grow sharper. Mm-hmm. And that's all we're doing in every conversation. We are either above that waterline, sensing out into a world with our eyes to see what we can see, or we're allowing ourselves to sense inward and to make shifts and changes and choices that are in alignment and give us a sense of the magic that we are. Mm-hmm. And at this point, with, history at another cusp of repeating itself, that's not the boat I want to go down with. Right. And it takes whatever it takes. Like, I think that's the beauty. It just really is. There's the same challenges turning to face ourselves as there is turning outward to fight the good fight, or to, rally the troops, or create opinions and judgments and a polarized world. I just have chosen to not have my participation be there.
Yeah.
And it feels bold in a world that says, our participation is needed.
Naomi, I feel our envelope of time is closing up, and I know this won't be the last time you and I are talking in this year. I have a feeling it'll be quite often. And particularly, we've been just starting to nudge into a conversation of I personally would really like to get you and Deb and any of the advanced practitioners that you'd like to include into adding into particular parts of the various series that I'm putting together, the online video series, but even more importantly, the live sessions that support those learning series. And this is the level we've been talking today. So being able to put it into words, what is this magic? What is possible if not this self-destructive business as usual paradigm we've grown up in? And so we'll be seeing each other a bunch in a number of different contexts, more on this podcast, more in those learning series. I'll be putting in the show notes, as usual, how to contact you and the various resources from Louise, any others that you'd like. so that people can get just a little bit more of a sense that there's there are visuals that can go along with the words that we've been sharing today, and also there are just entry level experiential exercises that we can start to share with folks to just get them a little bit more familiar with, well, okay, what is this stuff? What is this magic? As always, it's really great to speak with you and to take time together. It's particularly exciting this year because there is this kind of collaborative, open-ended, what's going to emerge kind of quality that is very moving. I can feel myself being moved right now about generating this kind of possibility at a time when it's most needed. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up this time together?
Yeah, I really think, Dean, that this is a catalytic time in such an extraordinary way. And I think that it's the continuation of the conversations and what you're talking about with the learning series, and to really begin to put this together in a way that others can understand and can recognize their own choice point. I think that is such a key, to recognize that lives inside of each one of us. And as always, I'm really deeply grateful for the space that you create and the conversations that become possible in really an unscripted yet intentional way. And I think those two together for me are a really important piece of the emergence I think we're going to see happen in the next year. Yeah. So thank you again.
And Naomi Irons, thank you so much. As always, just an utter joy. And I look forward to whenever the next time will be.
Thank you, Dean.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.